Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 9th virtual program this year. My name is Banti Chand, and I work at the Asia Society India Center. Asia Society's programs across our 14 centers are now virtual and global. Our discussion today, titled The Socially Distant City Commute, will focus on public transportation and mobility in urban India. This is the second program in our series on building cities of the future, architecture, urbanization, and public health. We have previously discussed housing and urban planning for Indian cities. That discussion is now on YouTube, and I urge everyone to watch it for some excellent insights on housing policies in India. Thriving cities with efficient public transportation systems have allowed urban residents to pursue an array of employment opportunities, accelerating their overall economic and social progress. In the aftermath of the pandemic, ensuring the right to accessible and affordable mobility will be crucial to India's economic recovery. This calls not only for improvement of hygiene and safety standards in mass transit, but also diversification into the sustainable micromobility sector. We hope the discussion today will explore avenues for long-term change in this sector with solutions that build on past successes and global best practices and pave the way for a safer and resilient future. And now I would like to welcome our wonderful panelists who are joining us from various parts of India. Madhav Pai is India's director for the WRI Ross Centre for Sustainable Cities, and he has published extensive research on various forms of public transportation and is the lead author of Bus Karo, a guidebook on bus operations and planning. He has over 15 years of experience in leading, designing, and managing urban transport programs and projects in India, Asia, and the United States. Shreya Gadepalli leads the South Asia program of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Over the last 2 decades, she has guided cities across the region to implement high-quality bus systems, create streets for all, and regulate the use of personal motor vehicles, ensuring that women have access to safe and convenient mobility options is very much a key area of her focus. We have with us Vivekananda Hallekere, who is a co-founder and CEO of Bounce, India's first smart mobility solution with a vision to enable access to affordable and clean mobility. Starting with a fleet of 8 motorcycles in 2014, Vivek and the co-founders quickly realized that there is a larger market need for the first and last mile connectivity for cities, more than 1 million plus population, thus setting up Bounce. Sonal Shah is the founder of the Urban Catalysts, advising multiple stakeholders on sustainable and equitable cities and transport. She was responsible for introducing India's gender-sensitive urban planning guidelines and actively contributed towards revising India's national urban street design guidelines to make them more people-oriented. And we would very much like to thank the World Resources Institute for providing outreach for this program. So a bit of housekeeping before we proceed. All those joining us on Zoom, please leave your questions in the Q&A box only. For our audience on Facebook, please drop them in the comment section. And now I'm going to invite Sonal to begin the discussion. Sonal.
Thank you, Banti, for kickstarting this conversation, and I'm very happy to be here to discuss. As cities and countries are in different phases of the unlockdown, if you will, what is it that mobility can do in order to facilitate both economic activity as well? And so what I'm going to do right now is just give an overview of what countries across the world have done, what are the measures that both national, city governments have taken, and outline some of the measures in India to kind of highlight what are the next steps for us. We will then follow up with presentations from our speakers and have an interactive session of question and answers, after which we will open this up to the public. So let's start with what has happened since the lockdown due to COVID-19 in cities across the world. We are now seeing active actions by both national and local governments in order to promote sustainable mobility as their economies open up. So let's take, for example, high-income countries like the United Kingdom, where we saw that the national government provided about £2 billion investment in order to encourage cities and councils to plan and implement cycling networks within their cities. They also provided active guidance in the form of toolkits, such as a cost and benefit toolkit that would help cities evaluate the benefits of the investments, for example, in cycling infrastructure and others. We have also seen the national government, so the Department of Transport, for example, Bailout Transport for London, which is the agency responsible for managing transportation services in the Greater London Authority area. Of course, this bailout came with certain preconditions. And one of the key conditions, of course, amongst many, was the reducing the passenger capacity from 13 to 20%. And this will keep Transport for London operating till October. On the flip side, what we have seen is that while this money was given, we have also seen the suspension of free travel for people under 18 years in the peak hours and for those over 60 years. There was also an increase in the congestion charging that London has implemented for some time now. So while we are seeing active action, we are also seeing some concerns around inclusivity as well. In Europe, what we've seen is cities have taken very proactive measures. For example, like Paris has implemented close to 650 kilometers of emergency bike lanes in order to facilitate movement of people. And it seems like in Europe, there is almost a competition between cities to see who is doing more. Moving over, if we look at the United States, we saw about 18 kilometers of emergency bicycle lanes being implemented in New York City. Bicycle shops were considered as essential services, and very interesting partnerships between the private sector and the Department of Transport and the mayor in providing free bicycle membership for essential workers. So, collaborations between the government and the private sector as well. But also, while we talk about high-income countries, if we move to some of the upper middle-income countries like Ecuador, again, very similar moves in implementing close to 63 kilometers of bicycle lanes in the city of Quito. In lower income countries like Colombia, and of course Bogota is in a sense the star city, while the bus rapid transit system has limited its capacity to about 35. We are seeing that construct 105 kilometers of new bike piece is that many of these initiatives were undertaken fairly rapidly, and responding rapidly as well in anticipating people's needs, taking the burden of public transport and supplementing it with cycling infrastructure. When we come close to India, after, for example, the lockdown on March 24th, and then we have seen subsequent unlockdowns, if you will. So we've seen conditional relaxations in starting from 20th April and also from 30th May onwards. We've seen some initiatives. It seems like the Indian government has been perhaps a little slow in its response, but just to say that on June 10th, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs issued a public notice that recommended million-plus cities to implement pedestrianization in at least 3 markets in their cities. And in July, with the support of ITDP India, they released the India Cycles for Challenge, again focusing close to encouraging 150 cities across India to developing cycling plans and piloting tactical urbanism initiatives. What we've seen, metro, as we were talking before, metro rail systems remain closed, and we have seen that city bus services initially, who were catering to essential workers, have also started operating regular services, however, with reduced fleet sizes, as well with reduced seating capacity as well, anywhere between somewhere between 25 to 50%. So if this is the situation currently with us, and while we've had a lot of technical guidance in terms of guidelines issued by multiple organizations, we are trying to see how cities in India, both at the national and the city level, can respond more effectively to cities as they come out of the lockdown. And I'm just going to take a few more minutes to highlight the findings of a survey that were conducted by GIZ India with experts across the country on what they felt would be the situation of urban mobility within 6 months and within the next 2 years. And close to 84% said that the travel demand for public transport will decrease, whereas travel demand for personal vehicles, online delivery vehicles, along with walking and cycling, is likely to increase substantially. We are also seeing this in cities like Calcutta, which has forced the state government, which is forcing the state government to take action as well. And close to 88% of the experts highlighted the need to invest more in walking and cycling infrastructure. So I'll take these findings to kickstart this discussion with our panelists. And I would first like to invite Madhav to share some of his ideas on one, what is it that the national government should be doing? And currently, we have seen the challenge that it has initiated. What should it be doing, and how do you think it can be done?
So, so thanks a lot, Sonal, and thanks Asia Society for the opportunity for this conversation. Broadly, I want to, both looking at the problem and then sort of how can we use this as an opportunity to go forward. I mean, I just talk about 4 things broadly. See, one is it's clear that we have, one of the big things is public transport is severely impacted, right? I mean, 2 things. One, India has invested now will invest close to $70 billion US, right? So 2 lakh crores we have already invested in building metro systems, and another 3 lakh crores is under construction. Now, this is a very large investment, and this is an investment that you will get locked into, right? If you build a metro, you're stuck with it for 150 years. And so there is a bit of worry that, if this situation persists, what happens to these systems? There are stories from both Southeast Asia, basically, and from Brazil, others, where financial depression happened and there were these half-built structures of public transport. And so this is a big worry right now. I mean, it's a it's probably one of the largest urban infrastructure investments in the country. And, so far, if this stays even for a year or so and things get back to normal, it's one thing. But if it gets beyond that, then really this big infrastructure sort of in spending or lock-in that we have created. And so I think, just given that the fact that these kinds of, events are likely to happen more with climate change and other threats, I think flexibility in designing systems is key, right? So I think that's my first point that I want to say, is that, flexibility is key. I mean, and clearly, I mean, even now, after spending the 70 billion and another 70 billion or whatever, you're still going to require, just to make sure that these systems are operational, you're going to have to, so India, just like the US announced a 25 billion sort of stimulus, we are going to have to, announce some kind of a stimulus. Just the back of the envelope number also, sort of some, basically, if even the buses that did not operate for these, whatever, 6 months or something, almost like 1.5 lakh crores or something like that is the sort of loss, right? And how that gets, so, so this is one big issue, is, to estimate what is the sort of, almost the recovery that public transport will require to be able to just sort of see this period. And then, what, and, I mean, some of this will have to come at the cost of some other capital investment. So you're going to stop doing some capital, infrastructure investment and put that money into sort of making sure. So that needs to be done. That needs to be designed carefully, cleverly. States, cities, national governments all will have a role to play. And, I mean, again, the hard difficulty is there is no finite time point. So if it's like a earthquake or if some of those disasters, it's much easier. But right now it's like a moving thing. So that's sort of one point I wanted to make. The other sort of broad, I mean, and then sort of coming to buses, I mean, I think, we've already seen the kind of challenges we've had with, so the buses are actually now serving in most cities, but 95% of the buses are operating, but, they are still operating with like 20 people and things like that. The strange thing, I don't know if you've seen the buses have 20 people, but the bus stops have 40, 50 people. So I think immediately some recalibration like that is required, because, the social distancing is not happening at the bus stop. So I think just again here, this whole being able to see the information and calibrate on a real-time basis and all of that is a huge opportunity. Again, buses will require, I mean, there are going to be losses because, they're not up. So that has to be created. That's the point I made. But the other big advantage is that, for years, our bus systems have sort of, the cashless technology has been existing for, 15 years. But for some reason, our public bus transport systems never moved to cashless, whatever. They all like their cash. So this is a huge opportunity now to move to cashless. And moving to cashless allows you, it's not just moving to cashless, it actually allows you to bring data, so that allows planning, and you're able to sort of continuously monitor and do things, which, and again, even if the metro is very well sort of monitored, we've never had the data about the buses, and so then we've never been able to sort of actually run a system that is. So that's the other thing. I think this is a huge opportunity to take these buses into cashless, and those kind of, and buses, it's very clear. Buses are flexible. Buses are, it's a great example to show the flexibility of the buses. And then the other thing, I mean, this is, so the third point I want to make is, for many years, I mean, since the car, transport systems have been very inequitable. I mean, you've given most of the space, the road space to cars. Equity has been really missing. And this today is actually an opportunity. And, I think what Paris has done to claim bicycle lanes, I mean, this is our opportunity to reimagine the streets and whether we can take some dedicated space for buses, because, we are not able to run as many buses because, so this is an opportunity to actually take space for buses, take space for bicycles and walking. And can we, I mean, and this is really, I mean, can we actually use some of these temporary things to reimagine the roads, but actually bring the whole equity aspect into the provisioning of roads and transport in our cities, which, has been missing. And then I think, two more points I will make. One point, I mean, I think, over the years, corporatization has happened, and more and more, we are seeing, there has been, there was a whole movement to say that, organizations like BST overpaid their drivers and conductors and all of these people. And more these people were hired on contracts and things like that. And if you look at if you look at the struggles that the BST drivers, etc., have had because of the exposure to COVID, lack of PPEs, other equipment. I mean, I don't know if people like the union leader Shashank Rao and others have been really crying hoarse that they haven't been given the protection. Mumbai has seen quite a bit of deaths and things like that. And so this whole empathy for the transport providers, whether it's the rickshaw drivers, they've all, rickshaw drivers were asking for 10,000 rupees sort of a subsidy because, the moratorium is the only thing we've done, right? Beyond that, for all of these people who run our cities, actually there has been even now, they're all, we are seeing lots of innovation. I saw one Ola driver putting a plastic sort of encasing around him. Somebody's using, people have put plexiglass in the rickshaws, all of those kinds of things. These are all very localized innovations, but we have absolutely no empathy, as a system for all of these people who run the system. And I think this is clearly, again, comes to the forefront of how do we ensure good wages for them and all of those kinds of things. And then finally, so that's another, I think, point that needs to be sort of brought. And again, I go back to my equity point. We've seen a surge in the two-wheelers, right? Growth a little bit, from in sales and things like that last 2 months. And I also feel like, again, our roads that we said, one, they're inequitably designed. They're also not these, two-wheelers are the highest number of users of our roads, but our roads are designed for cars. There's always been a bad, and then the two-wheelers get into accidents and we say two-wheelers are unsafe, and then, we ban them from the JJ flyover or some, it's this whole, there has been a complete sort of, it's been a reverse conversation. So this is a whole opportunity to completely reimagine the road, equitably for the people who use it, kind of a thing. And, as many experiments that we can push to do, and, the Cycles for Change initiative is a great example. But I think even more, whatever we can do to reimagine this road space is and then, and then the final point is, I think, in going back to my flexibility point, two innovations that I always feel, in transport that, as India, we should be proud of. One is this rickshaw, right? So it's even now with ventilation, if you see, the rickshaw is actually a very effective way for people to get around the city. It's safe. Women, a lot of women prefer using it because it's open and things like that. Even in this pandemic context, it has actually become really, especially in Mumbai, it's really become the transport that the majority of the people are using. And then the other is, we for years, people have been pushing over the air conditioning of public transport and trains and things like that. In Mumbai, many years ago, they decided to not air condition the locals, but put these exhausts, right? And they managed to sort of upgrade the system at 10% with very good ventilation. And now actually that kind of sort of localized innovations, which actually cater to our crowding conditions and things like that, and the sort of, big disparity in our populations, right, and income levels and things like that. I think, some of these localized innovations need to be, treated with a better request. So 4 points, transport systems have to be flexible. We'll have to come up with a package now to sort of support that big elephant that we have sunk, right, in the metro systems and things like that. The second is, how can we bring more equity to the road, give priority to buses, walking, cycling, build roads in a way that scooters move, but move slowly, so that they're safe and all of that. And then, really this empathy for the transport workers that, has been completely missing. And, I don't know how we use this opportunity to also sort of build on that conversation and the general conversation of this whole sort of corporatization of workforce. As we've seen this as part of this migrant labor. Transport is about 12-13% of this workforce, which is informal, and really an opportunity to sort of bring that conversation back. So I'll stop there and happy to sort of take on more questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madhav, for giving us an overview. And I think one of the key pieces that amongst all the points that you've raised is empathy. I think bus drivers, frontline workers, to a large extent have been very poorly affected and very seriously affected by COVID-19. I do want to come back to you in terms of one, seeing that, we have these technical solutions. What are the barriers stopping us from doing this, right? What are the key barriers that you identify?
Do you want me to answer right now, or do you want to come back to this? Sorry, I think you're muted, Sonal. Sonal, you're muted, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. No, we can absolutely come back to this. But I thought this was something that we could probably talk about as well. Shreya, I'll just come to you now. The ITDP India has been supporting the Smart Cities mission in the India Cycles for a Change Challenge. And I think there is, would you like to share some aspects about the challenge? I think this is a very good and a fantastic initiative being undertaken by the ministry.
Sure, so can you hear me? I have a small presentation which I could probably show about what kind of work we've been doing at ITDP. Just give me a moment, please. Can you see my screen? Sure. So thanks, Sonal, and Madhav. That it was good to hear from you what you think about the situation, and I couldn't agree more, especially about the business of buses and what we need to do with buses. But a lot of what I'm going to speak about is on a more humble but more universal means of transport, the bicycle. But let me first go into what is it that we had prior to COVID hitting us. So this is how our people in India traveled prior to COVID. This is data from the census. And while the numbers might have changed a little bit from 2011 to 2020, broadly speaking, you realize that the number of people who are on cars is a very small number in the country. And the majority of people are actually walking, are cycling, using public transportation, using buses, trains, and even shared modes like shared auto rickshaws and such in the country. And when it comes to women, it becomes even more inordinate. Women are inordinately more dependent on walking and public transportation in the country. So if that's the situation, let's see what does it look like. Like this is a graph from Mumbai as to how the space itself is allocated. While you realize that only 19% of people are using either personal or personalized modes of transportation, those modes actually occupy something like 82% of the space. So obviously something is amiss in that whole story. So let's keep this in mind before we go forward with what's happening with COVID. And suddenly you see that, COVID hit us, and who would have thought the whole world would have come to a stop? Mumbai locals, which carry something like 7 million people every day, are empty right now because of COVID. Obviously, this was an unprecedented situation, and therefore, we at the ITDP India program decided to run a nationwide survey to find out how would people respond to this. And the survey we conducted back in May, when it was at the peak or early days of lockdown. And this is what we found. And first of all, we found that women have much lower access to personal motor vehicles. That's not surprising, also given what the mode shares themselves were. Further, we found that people were going to travel less because of COVID, even after the lockdown would open up. And so this is a graph which shows that people who were traveling 5 to 7 days, nearly about 40% of those people were now going to travel lesser, even after the opening of lockdown. And again, now that we know a little more about what the future might be, this doesn't seem surprising. So a big reduction in the travel demand itself that's going to happen. And then what we found specifically about different modes was that walking and cycling was going to increase, and especially cycling, which was back then when it was completely locked down. It was quite surprising to us when we realized that cycling might actually increase by 50 to 65%, like 49 to 66%. And that's what a lot of our focus has been since then. But let's also look at the other modes. We also realized that public transportation would probably drop down somewhere between 14 to 19% of the trips which were on public transportation would drop down. And we've realized that not only are people more fearful of public transportation, but there isn't even that capacity that's available right now for safely transporting people. And there's also been a lot of questions about, what is safe transportation, public transportation to start with? Is social distancing of the kind that we're asking for in public transportation even required? And a lot of studies now show that maybe it's not social distancing as much as the universal use of masks, which might actually be better at protecting people. So that's something that we need to look at. Can we start ramping up the capacity of public transportation that we have, and also augment the total availability in terms of adding more buses, etc. And lastly, there is a potential chance that the usage of cars and motorcycles might go up. And if you know that already our streets are choked, would you want to have even more choked streets? Especially when you know all the externalities that these choked streets have. So with this in context, we actually initiated back in May this year with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the Smart Cities Mission, a program called Urban Log, which was a dialogue between experts and cities and citizens. So this was a 6-part series which had phenomenal response. We had close to about 5,500 people who registered to participate in these 6-part series from over 180 cities across India, and there were 29 speakers. And this actually led to asking the question, how do we ensure the safe movement and well-being of all in the wake of COVID? As things start opening up, this is precisely the picture that Madhav was speaking about earlier. You have people who were concerned about how would they get to where they need to get, right? And you also have to ask questions about the well-being, the mental well-being of people. This mother asking, how can my kids start enjoying the outdoors more safely? And with this question in mind, we came up with the answer that maybe what we need to focus on is the 2 green wheels, which would not only be healthy but affordable, a green transport mode that cuts congestion and pollution and also reduces the burden of public transportation, which we already know is burdened right now. So like Sonal said earlier, cities worldwide have been really acting in a big way. Paris has, for example, announced that there would be 650 kilometers of new cycleways, and it has plans to become a 15-minute city, so that you start redoing how the city itself would be. And that's something that we all need to start thinking about. How can we start reducing the need to travel long distances? How can we have much of the city near ourselves? And the truth is that a lot of our trips are already short in India. 58% of all trips in India already are less than 5 kilometers in length. But also things like, how would we get money to make sure that all of this happens? Like UK put this big $2 billion package to rescue transportation, especially focusing on cycling and walking. Multiple other countries have also done that. And as you can see, even in India, that number is growing. Cycle shops are running out of bicycles. There's a huge demand across India. And in this background, we tied up with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to start the India Cycles for Change Challenge. It was a challenge to inspire Indian cities to act now, to do quick interventions that can make cycling safe and fun again. And we have the Smart Cities Mission, the Fit India Mission, the Swachh Bharat Mission, all of them coming together to make sure that cities participate in this and take real action. And we're very happy with the kind of support that we've gotten for this challenge itself. Close 95 Indian cities have actually registered to participate and do something about improving cycling in India. So a lot of this thing that we have been hearing about the kind of pop-up cycle lanes across the whole world that you're hearing about, would become a reality in the coming months in Indian cities, because these cities are actively participating in it. And the whole idea is to test, learn from it, and then scale across the whole city so that this becomes the new norm. Capture that space so that for walking, cycling, and even public transportation. But this particular challenge focuses primarily on cycling. It's also about reinventing the city with the citizens. So it's not a top-down thing about cities just going ahead and doing something, but instead getting citizens involved in the process, not only to plan the interventions, but also to spread the word, to get additional citizen support, and to learn through monitoring what you're doing in the cities. So what does this embracing a citizen-led approach mean? And there are 9 different ways in which citizens can help cities. And we also opened up a sign up for citizens and citizen groups to support their cities in implementing the Cycles for Change challenge. And what they can do is to plan and design the initiatives with the city, coordinate the rollout of the initiatives on the ground, organizing consultations with citizens to get feedback, also looking at mobilizing volunteers for the initiative for a variety of things, being a volunteer to measure the impact and to support in various ways, spreading the word through social media and other means, communicating, documenting the impact of it, doing the monitoring and evaluation, and even sponsoring and bringing a sponsor to support the cities. The Smart Cities Mission funding is available to cities to implement these initiatives. And so there's a substantial amount of money that's also available that's backing this initiative for the citizens. And what we've seen is, like I said earlier, 95 Indian cities have signed up to participate in this challenge. It's a 1-year-long challenge to first pilot ideas and then subsequently scale them up. And over 1,500 citizen groups have also signed up to support these cities across India. So we're seeing fantastic support in how Indian cities could be transformed to becoming cycling havens. And with that, I'd end for now, and we could speak more about this challenge, but also about public transportation and what the future of public transportation should be.
Thank you very much, Shreya, for providing us an overview of the program itself. I will come back to you again on one big aspect that I also touched upon with Madhav is what are the big challenges that you're seeing that cities need in terms of scaling up rapidly, scaling up their NMT infrastructure rapidly. I will come back to you as well. I'll just go to Vivekananda. Vivekananda, as we've seen globally, new mobility services have taken a very, very bad hit, if you will, due to the lockdown. And what we've seen in India as well is that a number of initiatives have modified their operations, either to cater to delivery services or partner with governments in order to provide mobility to essential workers. We're also seeing that some of the most successful interventions are when there are partnerships with the government to provide mobility. Can you help us understand, for example, the impact of the lockdown on bounce, for example, and how have you negotiated that during the lockdown? And what is your plan in the near future, near 6 months to a year?
Yeah, thanks, Sonal. Thanks for the opportunity. Sonal, I think the impact is on everyone, not just private companies like us, but even public transport more, right? So public transport companies were already bleeding, and with the social distancing numbers that they have to go after, I think they are also very badly hit. So if you take the PMTC, which is the bus service provider in the city, they're also struggling very badly. And the metros, like Madhav was mentioning, are all stuck, right? And these are investments which have already been made. So I think COVID is impacting everyone. And I think even for a company like us, it definitely impacts because a lot of discretionary travel has come down, which is good in its own way. But for a company which, because of lockdowns and everything, we have to just not been able to operate, right? So that has been a challenge. But I think what we have done in terms of short-term initiatives that we have taken is to allow delivery partners to use our scooters, or we have done something called as a long-term rental where users can keep the scooters with them for a period which can be 7 days, 15 or 30 days. Apart from that, we also in Bangalore, what we did was we thought this is the time when we can experiment things, and we moved to 100% EV in Bangalore. We used to have 30,000 gasoline scooters. We've parked all of those and running on EV only now in Bangalore, and it's good for us. It's good for the economics as well. So this is one initiative that we have done internally to accelerate EV adoption, because this is the time when we can do all of this. So that is more on what we have been doing. But I think overall now that there is going to be a lot of pressure on public transport, because public transport was not just in the position to handle the kind of traffic which was already there, and with the social distance norms and rest of the things, we feel that there will be a lot of tailwind for a shared solution, because while we see car sales picking up in China, or personal ownership of vehicles increasing, I think in India, though we think that it might go up, I don't think a lot of people don't have the luxury of owning vehicles, right? People who are moving on public transport can't suddenly switch to owning a personal two-wheeler or a four-wheeler. So I think we as shared mobility companies can take the load from public transport. And I think this is the time, like Madhav was mentioning, how can we integrate seamlessly with public transport becomes very important. In day-to-day life, everyone was busy with their own work. Everybody had their own goals and other things, but this is a time when we can pause and reflect, right? And I think this is the time everyone has to make long-term investments. So our long-term investment is to accelerate EV. I think even cities have to look at long-term investments now, right? I think one solution will not fit everyone. So I think Bangalore had taken a step on bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes. I think this is the time we can accelerate dedicated bus lanes. And also more transparency for an end user on how to get from point A to point B in the most net emission effective way, right? Otherwise, see, today for a consumer, it is he wouldn't think about climate change. He wouldn't think about congestion. For him, it's personal convenience, right? So I think now all of us have to come together and make that transparency happen for a consumer, where it's still so seamless for him on if it's a decision between taking his own car out or doing a multimodal commute. The multimodal should look much seamless, right? And I think that is the investment that we have to make if we have to sustain as a city, right? So I think these are the things that one we have to do, and also work with other operators, including government, and get there. You're on mute, sir.
Do you currently have any partnerships or are exploring partnerships with either the BBMP in Bangalore or other cities in India in order to supplement the current mobility options?
Yeah, Sonal, both in Bangalore and Hyderabad, we used to closely work with metro rail authorities, as in every metro station used to have a bounce pick up and drop off point from where people could do first and last mile. We still continue to operate those places, one. Second, I think though there is no formal agreement with any of the service providers, I think it's a natural shift to shared solutions which is happening. One data point that we have been seeing is that the number of people who were not on bounce before, and number of people who are looking for bounce who have not done KYC, as in they're looking for bikes, have substantially gone up, as in the percentage of people who have done KYC and looking for bikes, and percentage of people who still are new to the system, that proportion has changed drastically, which shows that more and more people are coming to shared solution platforms and trying to look on how to use the shared mobility solution as such.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vivekananda. And I'll just come back to maybe Shreya and to Madhav and then Shreya on, we seem to know the technical solutions. What is hampering the implementation? What can enable that rapid deployment of particularly NMT infrastructure that we need?
I mean, the good thing about NMT infrastructure, walking, cycling, zonal is that and again I'll talk in the context of Bombay. It doesn't really need more money, right? There is Bombay spends I think something like 3,000-4,000 crores every year on sort of repairing roads, fixing roads, and things like that. One of the things we have seen that has been missing in this whole process, typically just, work gets given to a contractor and, and it's street. See, a lot of how road engineering, etc., has evolved in India has come from highway engineering. So, and I think, what we have in cities are streets and not roads. And I think there's a difference between that. And I think so this change in approach to build streets, where you require a bit of traffic engineering expertise, a bit of urban design, architecture expertise, and then the civil engineers coming together. I think this has been so this sort of multidisciplinary sort of aspect has been missing, and basically building it in is a slow process, because these are systems that are set in place. And I think typically I'm understanding what are the barriers to implementation. I mean, now actually the good thing is what has happened in the last few years, at least there are examples, Indian examples of really how how these streets need to be designed, how space can be created for pedestrians. I mean, almost all cities, all big cities in India have some really good examples of democratizing of these sort of spaces, the streets. And I think then it's once, so that has been established, then your question of going to scale is really one, really understanding, how you could use a combination of sort of citizen participation and pushing, how you can use make sure that the contractors and sort of that the market transformation happens, that the businesses who are actually implementing these roads and streets know how to do them at high quality. And one of the clear things we saw also, there's a lot of missing good design, good urban design. And I think just finding ways in which the urban design can be brought into this process. So I think it's so some things are simple. It's not like a technological switch, right? It's not like I have a engine that was something and I'm using something else, or how we switched, say, from people always give the fast adoption of mobile phones and things like that. But it's not a technological switch, it's a process switch, right? This is a process change. And I think process change always takes time. But I think they're actually finding the right levers, building campaigns, getting political support, all became so key elements to actually driving that change. And I think really having campaigns, building political sort of support and momentum, and then really understanding the third side, which is the business and the business incumbents, and making sure that you bring them along so that you're able to change. So it's a process which you have to do it systematically, and you have to think about systems change in a sort of ways. That would be my sort of response to that.
Shreya?
Sure. So, it's a fair point that things haven't dramatically changed yet in India, and yet I would say in some cities the change has been pretty dramatic. So if you were to take Chennai or Pune, which has been making big strides in the direction of creating streets for people. For example, Chennai over the last 5 to 6 years has already created about 125 kilometers of, or redeveloped 125 kilometers of streets to make them more streets for people. And the results are there to see. So when we did before and after surveys, we found that the number of pedestrians who are walking now on those streets has increased anywhere between 50 to 200%. And that's very heartening. And it also tells you that when you build the right infrastructure, people come to walk, right? Oftentimes we miss the bus, so to speak, in how we create the right kind of infrastructure. We create footpaths, but they look more like Olympics hurdles races, where you have to jump every meter to get to the next piece of the footpath. So instead, when you start creating the right kind of infrastructure, people start walking. And similarly, Pune has also been implementing, they're also on the path of creating about 125 kilometers of great walking environment. And they have one of the nicest walking spaces that the city has created on streets like JM Road, FC Road, DP Road in Pune. And I could show more pictures of it, of how the transformation itself has happened. And what's good to see is like in Tamil Nadu, the state government has taken notice and has now announced nearly about $1 billion worth of investments to transform streets across the whole state. So the whole idea is that when you start showing that change in a single city, others get inspired by it and start expanding the idea. And similarly, now we've basis the learnings from Chennai and Pune and other Indian cities. We've created a set of guidelines and a whole process toolkit, if you will, of how to create complete streets for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which is now which has been endorsed by it and it has now become the toolkit that Indian cities across the Indian cities could use. So, I'd say that things are changing in a big way. Cities like Chennai and Pune are showing the way of what this infrastructure can be like. And it's not just in creating the infrastructure, it's also about the institutional change. For example, in both these cities, they have created dedicated cells within the municipal corporation, which focuses on creating non-motorized transport infrastructure. So whether it be Pune, which has now an urban design cell, or Chennai, which has a special project cell, whose primary focus is to work on ensuring that this project of streets for people continues on. And I'm also very happy with the kind of response we've seen from cities across India to the Cycles for Change challenge. They've been doing some phenomenal work. For example, many of them already, I think about 30 of them, have already created events to engage citizens. They're starting to close down streets to show what it can be like to have a cycling only environment. And all of them are expected to create pilots by October to learn from them. The goal is that you don't just jump in and create pour concrete, but instead do something quick, learn from it, and then make that permanent and also scale it up.
So I'm actually hearing a few things. One is that we do have examples from multiple cities in India. We have Bangalore, Chennai, Pune, Mumbai, all of which are implementing solutions to improve walking infrastructure. Bangalore, for example, is also implementing a cycle lane, a protected cycle lane currently in the outer ring road. So perhaps there is a need to highlight or increase awareness around these existing practices, because we're seeing some questions which say that we need, why are we using examples of London or Singapore, and we need more contextual solutions. So one of the things perhaps we may need to think about is how do we increase awareness around the existing good practices being implemented in India. Over to you, Vivekananda. In terms of transitioning to an entirely electric fleet, what kind of support would you require from the government? Either, it's a very broad question, that you think can, again, support the shift to shared mobility services along with public transport, which is also shared mobility, but also NMT.
Okay. So I think for a service provider like Bounce or any of the players who have been operating, I think the question on whether to operate on electric vehicles or gasoline vehicles, the answer is crystal clear. We would love to operate on EV, but the options out there are very, very few and also not tested. For instance, we still have very handful of companies who operate on electric, who can manufacture electric vehicles in India. So that is the biggest the first blocker. So we wanted to do this a year and a half ago. We spoke to most of the Chinese folks. We spoke to Gogoro, to everyone, the Chinese guys. The biggest challenge is around, even if we are okay to import the scooters from outside India, right? The import duty become a big challenge. And importing batteries also is a dangerous good. So clearing it from customs is almost impossible, as in the amount of time it spends in custom warehouses, etc., is massively bad, which doesn't work. And also the ease of registering a vehicle like Gogoro in India, or any vehicle which is proven outside India, to bring it and register in India, the ARI approvals to everything is also very time consuming, where the manufacturers are not ready to invest this. To give you in terms of context, we used to do, pre-COVID, we used to do close to about 120,000 rides in Bangalore. doing close to about, say, close to about 1 million kilometers, right, on a daily basis. On EV, this would have made money for us, and it would have also saved everything, but we could just not do it, right? So we have spent now a lot of time with one manufacturer to get to EV. And I think if you've seen the notification, yesterday's notification, where now you can register a vehicle without batteries. So these are things which will actually enable us to accelerate EV adoption. But I think we still have a long way to go on EV. So we were forced to work on our own electric vehicle. As a shared mobility company, we believe swapping is the way to go for us, because cost of bringing a scooter to a charging point will always be super expensive and probably financially not viable. So swapping is very important for us. We have ended up building a swapping infra by partnering with local business owners. So today the infra that we have built is a small business owner like Kirana shop can own 3 batteries and become an energy provider. But the biggest challenge today is that who will fund him the 3 batteries, right? Today we have been struggling and we are somehow managing the financing for them. But if this becomes a part of priority lending from government, any lending around EV or the batteries, if it comes in the priority lending as such, then it becomes easier for this Kiranas to also buy batteries and become an energy service provider, which means that there is a distributed swapping infrastructure which is available for all, not just for shared mobility companies, but even for consumers now. With the new notification, now more and more people can buy, if at all they are buying 2-wheelers, let them buy electric vehicle, not a gasoline scooter, right? So that is also more possible. So I think in terms of EV, ease of import, ease of guidelines on how do we do this, and the regulations which came yesterday, if it can be implemented as such, because it's still an advisory, it's still not implemented. If the governments can implement this faster, it's great. And I think if there are, the Delhi government came up with fantastic subsidies and other things, right? While subsidies may not be the only way to go, right? Because subsidies can take you only to a particular point. So, but ease of implementation or ease of registering, etc., can make life very easy for someone like us to adopt EV. And the biggest and most beneficial thing that a shared mobility player can bring into the society is that we will accelerate the implementation of EV, because we won't wait for anyone to build the infra for us. We will go ahead and build the infra, and this infra can be used by personal consumers as well, people who own the 2-wheelers as well. So I think government should focus on how to enable EV adoption for shared mobility companies in multiple ways. And even the GST, right? GST for shared mobility companies today is at 28%, while for a car solution, it's close to about 5%. So there's a lot of imbalance also on guidelines to everything. So I think a lot can be done that way by the government, starting with easing importing of electric scooters or batteries, ease of registration of these vehicles. Third is locally enabling more and more companies to invest on batteries and cells in India. And end of the day, if local players are incentivized to manufacture either the batteries or the motors or the entire ecosystem. India is today world's largest 2-wheeler ecosystem. The same thing can happen on EV, nothing like it, right? So these are a few things that I can think of.
Sure. I just wanted to give an opportunity to each other to ask questions to each other, if you'll have any, so that we have a more interactive discussion as well.
So, I have a question. So today we are discussing socially distant commute, which is probably an unknown word, right? A year ago or a few months ago, right? So I think one thing that we are all missing today is the impact of climate change, right? Because climate change is going to be real. It just got me thinking. I saw a quote from Bill Gates recently. He said that if you're so worried about the COVID impact, he said that the impact from climate change is going to be much worse, and probably it is going to be a continuous one, right? Here, at least there's a vaccine which can solve for it, but there's no vaccine for climate change, right? So, and what do we do about it? It boils down to, because this is an inevitable thing that we're all probably thinking that, okay, it's not going to come very soon, and we're doing whatever it takes, right? So I think this is the time probably government should also invest on long term, because the impact of climate change also is going to hit us badly. And those probably, I don't know what will be the term that we will use then for climate change friendly commute, right? So if the city's roads are flooded to everything, how will cities move becomes a very important thing. So so my question to the panel is, what do you think about, I think over-investing in any one solution becomes a challenge. So what do you think cities should be doing now? Because probably the pressure on road is much lesser than what it used to be before. So what should the government be doing in terms of long-term investment to make sure that we are hedging our risk in terms of the risk from climate change, and how should cities move?
So, Vivekananda, I'd say that the solutions are still the same, whether it's COVID or climate change. It's just that COVID has hit us, and, it has hit us at an individual level, while climate change is like a slow burner, right? You really don't realize what the impact is till it's become a disaster. And therefore you've not realized what the real impact of it is. And I'd say that it's in our interest to use opportunities like COVID, where people really wake up and take notice, to do things which would dramatically change the course of the future. Things like this have happened in the past. For example, in the 1970s, when there was the oil crisis, where people were individually hit. And, I'd like to really focus on this point, that people really wake up only when they're directly impacted, and right then and there. That's when you need to make the change. And, countries like Netherlands, for example, really took action on it and made a difference. And it was not just Netherlands, but even other countries started making a difference in the direction that they took on transportation. Like many cities, which till then thought that parking was a public good. Instead, cities in Europe started taking a U-turn and said, listen, parking is not a public good, it's a commodity, and we need to be charging for it. So whether it be cities like London or Paris, or a whole bunch of cities, there's actually a publication, an ITTP publication, which speaks about 12 cities as to what they did. They started clamping down on parking. They reduced the amount of parking that was available. They started pricing parking. And now you see that Europe has one of the highest prices for parking. And in many places, like in central London, parking is, fetches the city more money than property tax does. So you can make that change. Countries like Netherlands made that change with cycling, creating a cycling haven out of the oil crisis of the 70s, and out of the whole the road safety issue where a lot of children were getting killed. And I'd say this is our moment to grab and use COVID as a means of transforming what the future of transportation would be in India.
I think congestion tax or some kind of tax.
Absolutely.
It will hit every person. I think that is the only way, right? Because we can't wait anything else for people to directly be impacted. Probably financial impact is one thing that might prevent personal ownership, right? At least from the charts that you showed, 5% of people use cars, but it consumes 30% of the space. So probably some kind of congestion tax. Do you think this is the time? And is there any mandate on that? Do you think any government?
That's what cities like London are doing. So they've increased the congestion price, and the national government has said, listen, that we will bail out the city provided you increase the congestion charge. So you get more money, but we will also give you additional money. And I think that's the direction to go in. You need to invest in better walking, cycling, and public transportation. The good news, like I said, with the Cycles for Change challenge, and another challenge that the national government is planning to come out with on pedestrianization, these would really make walking and cycling change in a big way across the whole country, and very happy to see that kind of support coming in from the national government. But also a lot of state agencies like DULT have taken a big role in saying we will champion these, and similarly in other states as well. And then, of course, when there is less traffic on the road, capture the moment, start creating dedicated bus lanes, whether it's bus priority lanes or even bus rapid transit, and prioritize the use of efficient modes of transportation, equitable modes of transportation, affordable means of transportation.
Just one thing. I mean, the other thing is I think flexibility is going to be key. I think, the fact that, in a way, to a large extent, something like COVID also has its links into climate change. I think flexibility is so, I think, and, partly a lot of the, starting to think about projects that are going to take you 20 years to implement, etc., is a very old style of building infrastructure. I think we have to think much more on shorter timelines, 4 or 5 years, build flexible systems that can be repurposed, etc. Because, and I think that thinking has to be more actively brought in. And the other thing is, I mean, I think you have to start factoring for resilience right away, right? So both flooding is one thing in play, but also heat, right? I mean, we are now at that point, and there are, I mean, recently there's been a New York Times article also that has been talking about how we will get to temperatures where you wouldn't be able to step out in the afternoons for 3 months of the year and things like that in most of India. So, and we've seen pictures of melted cars and things like that coming from the Middle East even last year. So it's not that far away. I mean, those kinds of temperatures will be seen in countries like ours also. And so I think anything we do, I think really accounting for these two, like accounting for some of these climate risks in design and trying to be as flexible in thinking about how we design our infrastructure will be very, very critical.
Sonal, you're on mute.
Yeah, we're now going to move to the audience Q&A, and I'm just going to take one. We also have them in the Q&A chat box. One of our participants have asked is, what is the incentive to municipalities to implement clean integrated mobility solutions? How does it benefit them if they take these steps? I think we've highlighted that a little bit, but it will be interesting to know, how does it hurt them if they don't? So I think there is a general perception that urban local bodies are not responsive. Just want to get the panel's thoughts on this.
So now I'll respond to one question that has just got asked, which is about sort of, about sort of more experts really running some of these organizations and agencies. And I think that, I mean, this whole lateral recruitment and, having actually professionals run transport rather than this general. So this is one big reform in a way in India that is needed, is to move away from sort of general managers and general administrators that come from, two actually more specialists running organizations for public transport. I mean, I think that is absolute, and this has been, the Administrative Reforms Commission, others have been attempting this for a while, and I think that is, I mean, again, I think that is another sort of movement campaign that needs to happen in our country. But it is clearly a barrier. It is a barrier to bring expertise, and so you don't, especially where you need nuanced solutions, nuanced understanding of the problem to solve, is not happening. So absolutely agree with the point that we need to find ways in which more professional, to people like us who actually are qualified end up working for research organizations and think tanks and non-profits and not government. And really, I mean, there are so many planners that come out every year and none of them get government jobs. And I think this is a serious problem that needs to be resolved in a way in the country. So it's a good point, but I agree with it. But I think there are some steps, but I think really no big successes yet.
All right.
Answer your question, so you can ask somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's true.
I say that a lot of energy needs to be invested in building the capacity of people who are already there in public agencies at all levels. So this cannot, as in, while I appreciate and I understand the need for greater expertise to come into public sector, and no questions about that, we need more capacity, in sheer capacity, but also augmenting the capabilities of those who already exist. And that's the kind of work that we've at ITDP have been involved in for many, many years. For example, at the Corporation of Chennai, we've conducted extensive training programs for engineering corps at all levels, starting from the junior engineer who's at the ward, all the way up to the chief engineer, so that they understand the nuances of what needs to be done. We also do a lot of on-ground training. For example, one of the components of our street design course is to get the engineers to sit on a wheelchair and go around for 100 meters, which completely changes their imagination of what a street is like, right? We get them to count the number of bicycles who passed by, who are almost invisible to them till that point. And once you start getting them to understand what reality is like, their approach changes quite dramatically. And that's the reason why I'd say cities now are starting to make a difference.
Yeah, sure. I'm also seeing one more question, especially around participatory planning processes. We're seeing that in certain street redesign exercises, we may find that we may have workers in the informal sector, particularly street vendors, who were initially part of the process, who were initially vending, through the process of redesign may not be found otherwise. And so one, especially during this time when the informal sector has been so badly affected, how does the process of redesign become participatory as well? And I think street vendors are one example, and we can look at multiple groups as well, because even during COVID-19, we are going to see a lot of online engagements. How do we enable access to those who may not, again, have access to laptops and computers and the internet as well?
Did you want any one of us to answer that, Sonal?
I think it's open to the panel, whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I mean, I understand that participatory planning has, hasn't been done in the right spirit in India and many places in the world. But I'd say that things are starting to change now, and some cities at least are starting to take it more seriously. The work that we see in Bangalore, where the cycle mayor of the city is actively working with DULT and the police department to come up with plans for how pop-up cycle lanes could be created, where they should be created. And the whole idea, even behind Cycles for Change, is that all this work needs to be essentially done as a participatory planning process. Engage community, engage people in the neighborhood. For example, if you want to develop the plan for a cycle-safe neighborhood, get people who are living in the neighborhood to go along with municipal engineers on cycle rides of the area to find out what are the pain points. That's the approach that Cycles for Change is actively promoting with city officials. And we've seen that city officials are already quite supportive of this agenda or this way of taking things forward. And yes, and I understand one of the participants has asked the question of if this becomes a bit of an elitist approach sometimes, because people who are engaged with public agencies might be not from the lower income. And I think that's a valid question. That does happen. So the question really is, how do you ensure that folks who really could benefit from it and who should have a voice in it participate in the process? How do we make sure that self-help groups and such start becoming a part of this whole engagement? And it's our job to make sure that happens.
So just a point on that. One of the other things, and just to add, not adding to what Shreya said. Also, now the use of this tactical stuff, right, where you put temporary installations and let people use and experience a space, and then you get, so it's not like it's sort of a experiential participation sort of, but that's what to a large extent actually using some of this temporary, and this has been now very well used across. In fact, some of them, I know in San Francisco, they actually have now officially, to get any change that is like concrete, like that is hard, you need to go through like approvals and things like that. Whereas these temporary changes don't require all of the approvals of city council, etc. And then they look at if people are complaining, and so if there are not enough complaints, then they make it permanent, right? So it's not about actually, getting community to come and talk about things like that, but actually making the transformation and making the transformation and then letting people experience it, and then using that feedback to then probably fix the design or things like that. So this tactical urbanism has been a very powerful tool of actually doing participation, and at the same time sort of not waiting very long for the process to get completed or it to become it, that you make sure you reach all the people, all the concerned stakeholders, etc.
And maybe I could speak about, Sonal, the transformation, precisely the kind of stuff that Madhav is speaking about. Let me share a slide just to show what transformation can be like. So this is right in the heart of Chennai. It's a street called Tyagaraja Road. And, as you can see, like in many other cities, it's inundated with parking. And what the city said was, can we try out something different over the weekend? And a couple of years back, we, along with the city corporation and the traffic police, tried out this, which was put up very simple barricades, put some plants, put some pots, put some paint, and see what that space would look like if all that parking did not exist. And initially, when this was tried out, most of the shopkeepers boycotted it. They said, how would our shops run without all that parking? And for the first time when it was done, they kept their shutters down on a Sunday, on a Saturday. And when they saw so many people on Sunday morning, they opened their shops. And then it was done the next weekend. And then it was done the next weekend. And finally, they all came around and said, this looks like great business for us. So let's do this. And this is what it looks like today. Right? So it's possible when you start engaging with people, local stakeholders, to bring about transformation. And similar transformation in a place like Pune, where you see this street where you have a footpath, but it's really not a footpath. And you see that wall out there, which denotes the boundary of the shops. And when the city said, what can we do about it? And we did a similar attempt with the city. And eventually the shopkeepers came around and said, listen, we are actually willing to give that space which is wasted in front of our shops to create something much wider, so much nicer in front of our properties. And you start getting footpaths like these when you engage. And a lot of that space that you see in front, like up to the tree, is actually private property, which has now come into the public domain. So it's possible to make changes like this. And Sonal, you and we've been on the street. And so all I'm saying is, once you're ready to engage with the local stakeholders and the community, you can bring about more permanent change.
Sure. Thank you so much. We have actually completely run out of time, but I'll just end 3 words, starting with Vivekananda, only 3 words on the future of mobility in the new normal.
I think collaborative, integrated, and very thoughtful.
Madhav?
I think empathetic. I think flexible and resilient. I think those are my 3 words.
Shreya, please go ahead.
I'll be a little more direct. It's walk, cycle, and bus.
That is a really good way to end this conversation. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to be together and talk about mobility. Thank you to Asia Society for hosting this discussion, and for the participants for actively engaging throughout the conversation. Thank you.